right, in this second video for the unit, we're going to look at cellular respiration. Specifically in this part, we're going to look at aerobic cellular respiration. Photosynthesis and cellular respiration are opposite reactions. Opposite reactions that feed into each other and essentially make a cycle. We'll start at the top of this diagram with photosynthesis. Photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplasts. The chloroplasts contain a compound called chlorophyll that drives the process. Carbon dioxide and water, along with sunlight, enter this reaction. So the reactants for photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and water and sunlight. In the chloroplasts, the reaction takes place, and the products are glucose and oxygen. Glucose is one of our monosaccharides, a simple sugar. These two products are what feed into cellular respiration. The products from photosynthesis become the reactants for cellular respiration. Glucose and oxygen go in, and through cellular respiration, we make ATP, our body's energy molecule, plus carbon dioxide and water. Most of this process takes place in the mitochondria of the cell. That carbon dioxide and water that's produced by cellular respiration, again, ends up being the reactants for photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight go into photosynthesis and make glucose. Then the glucose and oxygen go into the cellular respiration cycles, making ATP the energy that we need, plus carbon dioxide and water. These reactions are the exact reverse of each other. The reactants for photosynthesis are the products in respiration. The products for photosynthesis are the reactants in respiration. Respiration converts chemical energy in food to chemical energy stored in ATP. So we talked about this yesterday. We eat, and when we eat, we get lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. Our body, through a series of different chemical reactions, will convert all three of those things into the molecule glucose, again, as simple sugar. Our body then takes the energy that's stored in the glucose, releases it, and stores it away again in ATP. Again, reason being, our bodies can't use glucose directly for energy, but our cells can use ATP. So the process of respiration converts the chemical energy that's in the glucose into chemical energy that is in an ATP molecule. We then use that energy that's in that ATP to drive our cellular processes like active transport, protein synthesis, and muscle contraction. Again, the foods we eat, the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, can be broken down into smaller molecules. Again, glucose. And then used as the source of the energy for cellular respiration in order to make those ATP molecules. We get most of our carbohydrates from grains. We get sugars too. But your starches, your sugars, those are your carbohydrates. They have to be broken down into glucose. Our lipids come from fats and oils. So if you eat a steak, there's fat in it. The fats in there have to be broken down into glucose. And the protein we get from meats and beans, again, has to be broken down, has to be changed into glucose to drive this respiration process and produce ATP molecules. Once in the respiration process, the glucose is going to be broken down. The energy is going to be transferred to ATP through a series of steps. And those series of steps capture that chemical energy that's in the glucose and again, store that energy away as ATP. What we're going to focus on is what those steps are, what's used in these steps, what's produced in these steps, and how one step feeds into the next. The whole process starts with glycolysis. The glycolysis is the first step in cellular respiration. It doesn't matter if it's aerobic respiration or anaerobic respiration. Everything starts with glycolysis. Glycolysis is the first step of cellular respiration. In glycolysis, glucose is broken down into pyruvic acid molecules, and there's a net gain of 2 ATP molecules. So even in this very first step of cellular respiration, we're making ATP, but not much. Only 2 ATP molecules come out of the glycolysis process. Specifically, there are 2 pyruvic acid molecules that will be produced. And we're going to see that in the equation later. Glycolysis is a series of reactions. They are catalyzed enzyme reactions. If you think back to when we're talking about proteins, enzymes are a type of protein that are used as catalysts. They help speed up chemical reactions by lowering the activation energy. So these are some of those catalyzed reactions that we were talking about when we learned about enzymes. It takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. So this part actually is outside the mitochondria. And it does not need oxygen. So glycolysis happens whether you have oxygen or not. That's why glycolysis is the first step in both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So again, we have figures that will be in the packet that I gave you. This is figure 3. Glucose is broken down into 2 pyruvic acid molecules, again, specifically the numbers 2, and 2 ATP. And it's also worth noting you're going to get 2 of these NADH molecules out of it. These are going to become important for transferring energy down another step. So we get glucose going in, and then out of that reaction, we get 2 pyruvic acid molecules, 2 ATPs, and 2 NADH. So it's just the start of the process, and we've already got 2 ATP molecules in the bag. What happens next depends on if you have oxygen or not. So you can go one of 2 ways. If you have oxygen, then following glycolysis, you'll enter the Krebs cycle and then the electron transport chain, the ETC. If you don't have oxygen, then after glycolysis, you'll go into a process called fermentation. Aerobic respiration goes glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport chain. Anaerobic respiration goes glycolysis, then fermentation, just 2 steps. Again, we're going to focus on the aerobic part of it today. We did not get to the anaerobic notes, so we'll do those tomorrow, and there'll be a separate video posted on that. And again, aerobic respiration only happens if there's oxygen available. So you have to have oxygen present to do aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration primarily occurs in the mitochondria. So we move from glycolysis that takes place in the cytoplasm into the mitochondria where the aerobic respiration will take place. And again, there are 2 stages in aerobic respiration. First, you have the Krebs cycle. Then you have the electron transport chain. So again, out here in the cytoplasm, you have glycolysis. Glucose is your reactant. The glucose is turned into pyruvic acid and NADH. The pyruvic acid is going to feed into the Krebs cycle and be used to make ATP. The NADH is going to be fed into the electron transport chain and make ATP. So our two products from glycolysis, the pyruvic acid and the NADH, will become the reactants for each of these two processes, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So again, Krebs cycle starts with pyruvic acid. There are two pyruvic acids produced from every one glucose molecule. So the reaction we're going to see here happens twice for every glucose molecule that's broken down. It is a series of reactions, but again, we're going to summarize it as a single chemical equation. This is where the carbon dioxide is produced. Carbon dioxide is one of the products of the Krebs cycle, one of the waste products, and a small number of ATP molecules. Each pyruvic acid will produce one ATP, 4 NADH molecules, and 1 FADH2. Now, NADH and FADH2 are electron carriers. So again, both of these are going to feed into the electron transport chain. You are only producing one ATP for every pyruvic acid. So it's not a lot. One glucose molecule will break down into two pyruvic acids and two ATPs. Then each pyruvic acid will produce one ATP each. So even at the end of the Krebs cycle, we're only up to 4 ATP molecules. But more importantly, we have 6 NADH and 1 FADH2. And again, there are 2 pyruvic acids produced from every glucose molecule. So this reaction will take place twice. Pyruvic acid will break down into carbon dioxide, one of our waste products, and 1 ATP. NADH and FADH2s from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle will both enter the electron transport chain, the ETC. This is where the bulk of the ATP comes from. Again, it follows the Krebs cycle. So it's glycolysis first. We get 2 ATPs from that, 2 pyruvic acids from that, and 2 NADHs. Then the 2 pyruvic acids go through the Krebs cycle. Each pyruvic acid produces carbon dioxide, 1 ATP, 4 NADH, and 1 FADH2. So double that, and you get what every glucose molecule will give you. So every glucose molecule will give you a total of 4 ATPs at this point, 6 NADH, and 1 FADH2. The electrons from the NADH and FADH2 are what run the electron transport chain, and in this process we'll produce 34 more ATP molecules. So like I said, this is where the bulk of the ATP comes from. Oxygen is required for the electron transport chain, so it's one of the reactants. It's NADH and FADH2 plus O2. This is where the aerobic part of aerobic respiration happens. This is where the oxygen is used and needed. Water is formed in this step. It is one of the waste products. And again, 34 ATPs. There are 38 ATP molecules in all being produced during aerobic respiration. You get 2 from glycolysis. There's 1 from each pyruvic acid, and again, there's 2 pyruvic acids produced from 1 glucose molecule. So there's 2 more ATP there. And then there's 34 from the electron transport chain. So 38 ATPs in all. This makes it the much more efficient process. You produce far more ATP in aerobic respiration than you do in anaerobic. So what we're going to try to do now is understand that equation. Glucose plus oxygen produces carbon dioxide and water. Well, glucose is one of our reactants in that equation because it's used in glycolysis. It has to enter from the outside. We have to consume it. We have to get it from the outside world. It is one of our reactants. As is oxygen. Oxygen is used in the electron transport chain. It's not produced anywhere else in the process. It too has to come from the outside and is one of our reactants in our overall equation. Carbon dioxide is one of the products that doesn't get used up or turned into ATP. It is truly a waste product, and it comes from the Krebs cycle. Water is also a true waste product. It's produced in the electron transport chain, and it doesn't go anywhere. It's not used for anything else. It's a true waste product. It's a true leftover. Most of the energy that's released is used to make ATP molecules, again, 38 in all, but it's not 100% efficient. Some of it is just released as heat. And that's what helps us maintain our body temperature of 98.6 degrees. So again, here's the equation. Glucose reacts with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. Now we can see where all of these things come from. The glucose is the reactant you need in glycolysis. It comes from the outside world and it comes from the food we eat. Oxygen's a reactant. It's not produced anywhere else in the chain of reactions. It has to come from the outside world. That's the reason we have to breathe. And again, that oxygen is used in the electron transport chain. These are the only 2 things that have to come from the outside world. These are the only 2 true reactants. The pyruvic acid that's used in the Krebs cycle comes from glycolysis. So it's made in one step and it's used up in the next. It's gone by the time the process is done. The NADH and FADH2 are used in the electron transport chain, but they're produced in both glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. So they're made in one step, used in the other. We call these intermediate products. They're produced somewhere, but then they're going to be used up again later. They don't ever show up in our chemical reaction. The products that are left over at the end that aren't consumed anywhere else along the way, the things that we actually have to get rid of that are true waste products, are carbon dioxide, and it's released by the Krebs cycle, and water, which is released by the electron transport chain. Again, the ATP is the usable energy that comes out. We do still lose some energy in terms of heat. That maintains our body temperature. It's not totally wasted energy, but it's not being used to drive cellular processes. And that's where we left off. In the next video, we'll look at the aerobic side of things.